I'm supposed to list my disclosures, so expressing my gratitude to CIHR and the Ontario HIV Treatment Network for salary support and operational funding. And I have consulted for the Canadian Public Health Association and submitted those fees to my partnership. Also, just recognizing my list of acronyms, the University of Ottawa, RIO Research Institute, the OHRI, Li Ka-shing Knowledge Institute at St. Michael's Hospital, and the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences. And finally, I acknowledge our location on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin Nation. So I'll start by telling you that when I was sitting exactly where you guys are, almost 15 years ago to the day, I thought that I would never have anything to do with research at all. I had really rushed through my PEARLS evidence-based medicine exercises, which were kind of the new age at the time, FMRSP and QI projects, and I really honestly could not wait to put that crap behind me. My plan was to work a couple days a week, maybe doing a smattering of things in primary care, palliative care, and spending time with my young family. However, I had taken a maternity leave during my residency, so still had a few months left of my PGY3 year before I was able to head out into practice on my own. And I'd cobbled together some time in women's health with a focus on disadvantaged populations. And herein enters the flashlight. So as part of my fellowship, I was doing my PGY3 sort of fellowship time, I was doing some time at the HIV clinic at the Ottawa Hospital. And this would have been a time when antiretroviral therapy was fairly well established, people were tolerating it well, and it was certainly leading to improved life expectancy and quality of life for people living with HIV. However, I found that a lot of the patients I was seeing in the clinic did not have a family physician, and because of that, they weren't receiving preventative care. And, the rooms were sort of suboptimally situated for people like us in family medicine. The tables were kind of stuck in the corner and not moving. There were no lighting sources. And the space wasn't ideal at all. So I was doing pap tests for women who would put one foot on the hip of the nurse, and then I would use the flashlight as a lighting source to try and get the squish in the corner, trying to get their pap test done. And I thought that there must be a better way to integrate family medicine into the care for this population. And that brings me to my first research message for the morning. Let your clinical curiosity guide your research questions. So this flashlight conundrum continued to brew for a couple of years for me as I started my first clinical practice locum at the Sandy Hill Community Health Centre with Madeleine Monpetit and Suzanne McKim. And the practice I was covering at the time had a specific focus on really disadvantaged populations. So in that position, I had the opportunity to establish some relationships with some of the HIV specialists at the Ottawa Hospital and to develop sort of a sense of what I thought my role could and should be in providing primary care to people living with HIV. Then in 2005, I decided to take an academic path, and I joined the Department of Family Medicine as a clinician teacher. And I kind of continued thinking about what that role could be for family doctors in delivering care and meeting the care needs of people living with HIV. And early on, I acquired my first research grant, which was a Janus grant from the College of Family Physicians of Canada. And these grants are great for people with a burning clinical question that they want to carry through and understand through research. And my project was to identify the role of the family physician in providing cervical cancer screening to women living with HIV. And what we found was that cervical screening rates were lower among this population, but that women were more likely to receive screening if indeed they had a family physician. So I felt like pretty bolstered in my endeavor, recognizing that the data was actually supporting what I was experiencing clinically. Then in 2007, I was lucky to receive a 3-year healthcare provider scholarship from the Ontario HIV Treatment Network. And these were awards that were meant specifically for clinicians, not for researchers, but for clinicians. And I used that funding to complete a Master's in Public Health in a distance program through the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. In addition to my coursework, I did a thesis, which was a systematic review, trying to understand elements of the chronic care model, so decision support and clinical information systems in delivering care to people living with HIV. And what that study found was that interventions like computerized reminders or clinical practice guidelines can really help physicians to optimize the care they're providing to their people living with HIV. In 2009, I took a sabbatical to provide clinical care at an HIV clinic in Lesotho, Southern Africa. And while I was there, I submitted and then somehow was miraculously awarded a CIHR Fellowship Award in the area of HIV health services research with Bill Hogg as my supervisor. And these awards were salary support, again, for clinicians, so people who are practicing medicine, and they really were able, through them, I was able to carve out some protected time for research. And so at that time, decided to make the transition from a clinician teacher path to a clinician investigator path. And because I had that protected time, I decided I really wanted to emerge from those 4 years with the skills and experience to make me a confident, independent researcher. So I decided to start my PhD in epidemiology at the University of Ottawa, and my dissertation was called "A Population-Based Evaluation of the Delivery of Care for People Living with HIV in Ontario." And this kind of program of research used administrative data held at the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences to really get a sense of how care was being provided to people living with HIV in the entire province, with a focus on understanding the role of the family doc. And the main findings arising from that were first that people living with HIV have much greater comorbidity, so physical and mental health comorbidity, compared to other people living with, without HIV in the province of Ontario. The second was that the majority of care to people living with HIV in the province is actually provided by family physicians. So most of the visits are provided by family physicians, and most people actually receive all of their care from family physicians. And not all of these physicians, in fact, many of these physicians aren't highly experienced in HIV care. And the third kind of overarching finding was that people living with HIV in Ontario who have a family doctor are more likely to receive preventative care. The caveat being that if that family doctor didn't have a lot of HIV experience, there was a risk that people could be less likely to receive antiretroviral therapy, which of course we know is important, crucially important for people living with HIV. So then, building directly on this entire body of work, Claire, Lydia, and I embarked on an 18-month process to submit. It was a multi-phase process. We submitted, went through the LOI phase, etc., for a group of team grants that were called the Community-Based Primary Health Care Team Grants from CIHR. And we were lucky to be awarded one for the Advancing Primary Health Care for People Living with HIV program of research, or the Living with HIV Innovation Team. And these were really wonderful opportunities because they provided $2.5 million over 5 years to really develop a program of research around primary care. And very shortly thereafter, I was awarded a 5-year CIHR New Investigator Award in HIV population health and health services research, which allowed me the kind of the stability to establish my early research career. So all this to say that every step of this evolving program of research arose from one clinical question that for me took hold when I was sitting exactly where you are now. And my second message is, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. And I know that's probably easier said than done at a time when it probably seems like most of your career has felt out of your comfort zone or out of your control. But I wanted to share one example of how stepping out of my comfort zone, again, at a time when I was sitting exactly where you are now, really tangibly shifted my professional career. So shortly before the end of my residency, the editor of the Canadian Medical Association Journal came and gave a talk to the residents and faculty here at the Department of Family Medicine. And I attended that talk and chatted with him a bit, and I think he was looking for what he thought was going to be a regular, I think female, run-of-the-mill family doc who could provide a really generalist kind of lens on practice. So when I started my clinical practice, I also started at a very part-time position as an associate editor at CMAJ. Now, Eric World-Torton was already working there in a much more scholarly and established capacity, and I was really grateful for his mentorship, because I have to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. As I said, I kind of scammed through my Pearls exercises, didn't really understand the role of research, I didn't understand how a journal worked or what I was doing there. However, during that time, I really made lifelong connections with some amazing healthcare researchers in Canada who completely changed my perspective of the role that health services research plays in how we deliver and practice medicine in Canada. Another thing I learned is how a typical medical journal works. So there's this group of editors and support staff who are like the worker bees. There's a queen bee who's the editor of the journal, and he or she sort of leads the team and defines direction. And then there's an editorial board who are supposed to be a group of experts who can provide guidance for where the journal should be going and expertise about what kind of content they should be publishing, as well as sort of some oversight and ethical protection. And to make a long story short, the editor of CMAJ was fired over an issue of editorial independence. And many of the editorial team and a lot of the editorial board quit en masse. And this may not sound like a big deal, but it actually was a huge deal, because understanding the role of the publisher versus the editor in scientific publishing is quite crucial to editorial independence and understanding that relationship. So this is a really polarizing event in healthcare research, and it had a lot of media attention, certainly in Canada, but also around the world. And in the heat of the moment of this sort of cataclysm, the editorial board said to this now much smaller group of worker bees, we should create another non-association Canadian medical journal free from pharma and medical device interests. And what they meant, but what took us a while to figure out, was that they really meant you should create another non-association Canadian medical journal free from pharma and medical device interests. But we were young and starry-eyed, and so we did, and for 6 years I lived the mantra of with discomfort comes opportunity. And by taking that leap, I got to think about new ideas and push the boundaries of medical publishing, and I felt like I was a part of a really important movement in aiming to make research knowledge more freely available rather than locked behind copyright barriers or traditional paywalls. I was able to help develop the University of Ottawa's open access policy, which was one of the first of its kind in the country. And most importantly, I got to work alongside daring and creative individuals from a wide variety of disciplines who shared in the common goal that scientific knowledge should be held in the hands of the public. And for a while, I felt like I found my people. And for many reasons, we had to retire this project, but I don't regret for a moment living in that level of discomfort. And that leads me to my next research message for the morning. Don't just step out of your comfort zone, embrace your inner imposter. So this is a cartoon that my parents found and blew up at a time when photocopiers were probably new, and framed it to me, and they gave it to me for my birthday or Christmas or something like that. And it's probably something it's probably the real one. It's not even probably Claire. It's probably the type of thing that any parent can get at the store where parents of children who will one day go to medical school shop. And anyway, so they gave it to me. But the truth is, I, and maybe many people here in the room, battle something that looks more like this. Sort of this fear of being exposed that we're not as competent as our credentials and experience would have us believe. I mean, what screams imposter syndrome more than completing a PhD at the age of 40? Medicine really creates a perfect storm for the inner imposter. It thrives on perfectionism. It has a knowledge base that's constantly changing. And family medicine in particular really requires us to attend to the emotional needs of patients, a wide variety of patients on a day-to-day basis, day in and day out. And in turn, I suspect that many people in this room have oversized brains that are hardwired to respond to these constant stimuli. And if there's one thing that 16 years of post-secondary education has taught me, it's that education might feed your curiosity and broaden your skill set, but it alone can't tame your inner imposter, because there's always more to be learned. One of the most humbling things about medicine, particularly about family medicine, and I've learned about family medicine research, is that it's more important to know the things you don't know than to know the things you do. And I spent the last couple of years settling into that space, being more open about what I don't know, and learning to ask for help from people who are wiser, more thoughtful, and more insightful than I am, simply delighted by the fact that they welcome me into their midst. And by changing this perspective, I found greater opportunity for more meaningful collaboration. It's a path that would be hard to walk alone, so I'm certainly grateful for all the mentorship and support I've received from so many people, many of whom are in this room. And asking for support can be hard, but it's something I've learned to be better at. And I can say with absolute confidence that the times where I've been able to say, I don't know, I'm not sure, or even I'm scared, have really enriched both my clinical experiences with my patients as well as my research career. I've also had a few subpar support experiences, and I can't resist sharing one. The pinnacle being when I was feeling really overwhelmed a number of years ago by the just sort of the amount of research duties and teaching duties, et cetera, on my plate, feeling in quite over my head, and a senior colleague asked how I was faring. And I kind of leaned right into that vulnerability and said, I'm struggling. And he or she suggested that a good way to help me with my situation would be to, get ready, get pregnant with a third child. So this was the best advice this person could give me in my time of crisis. I think, he or she may have been thinking about Claire Liddy, for which there's a direct correlation between number of children and academic productivity. But I think even the most novice researchers among us will remember this important tenet of health research. Correlation does not apply causation. And don't get me wrong. I just wanted to bring back to and one more message, which is when in doubt, bring your inquiry back to your patients, because at the end of the day, research can actually be a pretty challenging career. It can have its downsides as well as its upsides. There's the publish or perish mentality that still persists in academic medicine. And while mustering the energy to engage others in your research can be exhilarating, it can also be really time-consuming and exhausting. I'd like more time to really be able to think about my research and my research questions, but find many of my days consumed by meetings while also trying to convince others that my day isn't just one long coffee break. And finally, there's the ongoing pressure to acquire grant funding, including the all-consuming process of writing and submitting grants, and the all-too-frequent letdown of not being funded and then starting over. And I didn't finish my timeline trajectory. So a few months ago, I thought I knew exactly what I'd be doing every day for the next 5 years. Our team had submitted and was highly ranked in a letter of intent phase for a team grant, another team grant, focused on HIV and self-management supports in the community. So we thought we were a shoo-in for this funding. And it was a big surprise when we didn't get it. But it's a good reminder for me, actually, that research isn't a linear path. It's an iterative process of identifying a clinical or health system problem, identifying potential solutions to that problem, implementing and testing those solutions, and then kind of going back and hitting the repeat button. So in many ways, for me, not getting this grant has been a really important reset button, and I'm taking it as a gift. It's a gift of time to really reflect on the questions that matter most to me and to my patients from the very privileged vantage point I have as a practicing family medicine researcher. Without a doubt, working alongside people with experience takes practice, just as patient-centered care takes practice, patient-centered research takes practice. And in doing so, I've really had to harness my family medicine skills, whether it's working with people who use drugs, people living with HIV, or people who are homeless. But this collaboration has also really challenged me to try and get my research questions right for the people my research is really meant to serve. And just look at the diversity of issues you yourselves will be presenting on today. From this word cloud of the presentation titles, things like primary care, family medicine, patients, and residents really stand out. But if you look deeper, you can see the range of projects arising from your experiences with your patients. Questions related to clinical care for concussions or diabetes or prevention, questions addressing health equity with terms like gender, transgender, and neighborhood marginalization, and questions about the quality and competence of care delivery, as well as opportunities for narrowing gaps in care that exist in our educational programs and in our healthcare systems. So as you start your own family medicine careers, remember that in reflecting on those questions arising from one individual patient, you have the opportunity to use quality improvement to impact your entire practice, and through your research, the potential to extend your impact to whole populations and whole practices, whole health systems. And for me, I feel very privileged that I have a position where day in and day out, I can impact the lives of patients, practices, and the health system. So regardless of how much you ultimately decide to include research into your future careers, I invite you to be open to your own flashlight moment. And in the meantime, take today to honor the contributions you made through your own scholarly projects and to celebrate the research successes of one another as you start on your own independent path. Okay. Thank you.